rescue work. We rescued the baby, and the kid was severely hypothermic. In other words, the kid was very cold. We were worrying about the kid's lungs because of all the feces around the kid.
The legal representative for the Aiken 3 says he's been instructed to institute a suit against the state for the 6 years they spent in prison. Mohammed Ramdera says this is a ceremony to officially welcome homes Piwe Bolo, Sipho Gavin and Boindaweni at Everton, south of Johannesburg. The three were released after Director of Public Prosecutions, Bulelani Ngcuka, decided not to retry them. They were sentenced to death for murder of 3 people in March 1993, but the appeal court overturned the verdict in August this year after the PAC claimed that its armed wing Appler had carried out the attack. Democratic Party leader Tony Leon says his party will institute legal proceedings tomorrow against agents who put spying devices in its Cape Town offices. Speaking at the DP's Northern Province Party Congress in Port Elizabeth yesterday, Leon called on President Thabo Mbeki to ensure that the state intelligence services are under control.
Will motivate the President to move decisively to reassert constitutional control over all intelligence operatives and operations, to immediately ensure that all the balances, all the checks which our Constitution and Parliament put in place are now implemented and made effective.
Reports from Britain say the European Union plans for British beef to be clearly labelled in an attempt to get beef back into French and German supermarkets. According to reports, the British government has agreed to this compromise. A few days ago, the European Commission decided to take legal action against France for refusing to lift its ban on British beef. Our London correspondent, Keisha Michael, has details.
The British Prime Minister Tony Blair is said to want a solution to the British beef crisis before next week's Anglo-French summit. He hopes that putting labels on British meat marking where it is from might lead to France lifting its ban. British opposition parties say this is wrong, as the label would act as a stigma, but British farmers have welcomed the move. The labelling plan is seen by the EU as an ideal compromise after French government sources indicated the labelling programme could lead to France finally lifting its ban on British beef. Katia Michael, SABC Radio News, London.
And lastly, English playwright William Shakespeare has been voted Britain's most respected son. A survey by Heritage magazine found the celebrated bard is considered an even greater Briton than scientist Isaac Newton, who first determined the principles of gravity, or wartime Prime Minister Sir Winston Churchill, who came second and third respectively. The magazine's readers chose printing press inventor William Caxton, Charles Darwin, the Duke of Wellington, Queen Elizabeth I, William the Conqueror, Alfred the Great and Captain James Cook to complete the list of the country's 10 most esteemed citizens. And that brings us to the end of the bulletin. I'll be back. I'm Mapaseka Makoti, and I'll be back at 11 o'clock.
The impending Nedcor-Stanbic merger. How are the respective spin doctors from both banks handling the story? That's just one of the items ahead on this week's Media at SAFM. It's Sunday, the 21st of November. Very good morning to you, and thanks for joining us. It's 4 minutes past 10. I'm Jeremy Maggs in our Johannesburg studio.
And I'm Fiona Ramsey, live from our Cape Town studio this morning. And what a beautiful day it is in Cape Town. We'll also talk to the International Federation of Journalists about the continued detention in Luanda of an Angolan journalist and details of a conference on female readership of newspapers and magazines.
The new editor of the Pretoria News, Ivan Finn, talks to us, and also the SA Guild of Motoring Journalists responds to our item last week on the question that we asked, is the industry and the media just a little too cosy?
All the week's media news just after 11 o'clock, including who's returning to Radio 702 in Johannesburg. Lots of great music to keep you company this Sunday here on SAFM. But starting the show, as always, we have Alistair Cook and his letter from America.
One of the most touching and generally unreported incidents of the month was the decision of the Norwegian government to invite Israeli and Palestinian leaders to Oslo for a memorial service in honor of Mr. Rabin, the assassinated Israeli Prime Minister. It was, I think, an inspired idea to use this service as an overture to a meeting that might walk an inch or two nearer the dishearteningly receding goal of a Middle Eastern peace. The memorial service set a tone of gravity, and the place was a guarantee of neutrality. Something very difficult to promise when these two sides get together in the Middle East or in the United States. And then the President of the United States had an idea. Acting on an impulse, he decided it might help things along if he went too. He signified, probably a fast email, "Dear Prexy, I'm coming too." Mr. Clinton had in mind his own bit of diplomacy. He heard that the Russian Prime Minister was visiting Oslo, and Mr. Clinton thought it might offer a useful opportunity to beg Mr. Yeltsin's man to stop the war in Chechnya. As it turned out, Mr. Clinton's impulse, his decision, effectively gagged any hope of agreement or even useful negotiations between the two principal actors, who, like minor characters opening an opera, were scuttled into the wings while the footlights soared, the trumpets sounded, and the star, the ruler of the universe, took center stage. That, I hope, is a vivid image, but it was literally true. The overwhelming of a subplot, peace talks between Prime Minister Barak and Yasser Arafat, by the appearance of the big hero who was not supposed to be there. A promising diplomatic meeting was hustled out of sight with the arrival of a suddenly alerted press circus accompanying the President of the United States. Before coming to the main point, I'd better say that Mr. Barak and Mr. Arafat were in no mood to conduct serious discussions and retired into their prepared positions. But the truly disheartening story about Mr. Clinton's visit to Norway is the effect of the presidential entourage on the Norwegian establishment and the Norwegian people. Only one reporter I've come across, one Alex Vardamis, put the thing in its social context, the effect on the ordinary Norwegians. And to appreciate the kind of shock that they suffered, you have to understand the social tone of their own monarchy. And here Mr. Vardamis put it with praiseworthy, if gruesome, simplicity. Quote, "Norway is a country in which the king skis on public trails and the prime minister rides the bus to work. Citizens pride themselves on an unpretentious lifestyle. What shocked the Norwegians was the imperial nature of the American delegation. The president arrived with an official entourage of, guess what? In Roosevelt's time, it might be 15, 20, say at the most. The president arrived with an official entourage of more than 700 courtiers and sundry retainers who appropriated an entire hotel in downtown Oslo. 674 rooms were set aside as Fortress America. Mr. Clinton was assigned 3 bedrooms, each with cheerful fireplace and 3 baths, jacuzzis, gold fixings. The Norwegians plainly realized that other heads of democratic states do not choose to boast about their unpretentious lifestyle. I do not believe there was extensive, or perhaps any, coverage of this imperial takeover on American television. In fact, what shocked the Norwegians is something that probably never crosses the mind of Americans, who know one thing for sure, that they belong to the greatest, most democratic democracy on earth. I used to notice when I went around colleges and universities and sat in on history classes, I don't ever remember any classes comparing the American system with other democratic systems. I've always wished that one faculty could be established in every American university, better, one weekly class in every high school, that should study what you might call comparative democracy. Every country on earth with strong pretensions to democracy, including the United States, could learn something from discovering where, in some things, other countries are more democratic than the United States, in other things, less so. The Norwegian trip was alarmingly notable for other expressions of Norwegian sentiment, which, to put it mildly, did not monopolize the evening news tele-coverage. I think we'd better not go into the appalling emergency the Oslo government and the police were thrown into by Mr. Clinton's sudden impulse. Oslo is a quiet, easily disciplined capital. Suddenly, imagine, they had to fetch in hundreds of concrete barriers against terrorist car bombs. Highways were barricaded, commercial traffic suspended. Every manhole sealed along the route of the 700 presidential arrivals. Better not reported at all are the fortunes lost by the shops, cafes, restaurants, and so on. But much of the frantic security precautions were well taken. There were at least half a dozen large and powerful groups of protesters, all anti-American for one cause or another, from people condemning the existence in America of the death penalty to Arab groups who know every terrorist agent kept in an American jail. Think of any anti-American slogan, and there were angry people there to chant it. But they did more than chant. A great mob descended on the hotel housing the American delegation. There were cars smashed. It took police with tear gas and dogs, mounted police, shielded police, a 2-hour battle, many wounded, over 80 arrests before the mob broke up and stormed or sulked off. And Oslo returned to mime again its reputation as the most orderly city in Europe. President Clinton in Oslo will be remembered by the Scandinavian countries long after some more lurid and riotous world events are long forgotten. Well, while all this was shattering the general quiet and the Scandinavian picture of America, there was a dispatch from London that, both in the papers and on the telly, received, on the contrary, ample and marvelling coverage. It was the daring act of Mr. Tony Blair in banishing all the hereditary peers from the House of Lords, all except 92. Why 92? An inquisitive youngster asked me. I saw much trouble ahead. Offhand, I said, I can't tell you. Explaining the 92 to an American audience, in fact, whether in print or over the tube, proved impossible, even for the understanding of people who cared. What's it mean, the youngster piped up again. 666 hereditaries have to go, but 92 allowed to stay were elected by their people. I thought they were all unelected. Well, it was explained in the New York Times that, quote, for most of the century, the House of Lords has held little real political power. I thought it had none, squeaked my complainer. Little real political power, except as a delaying, modifying influence. Why delaying? How modifying? The reporter's explanation wasn't helped by a quotation from Lord Strathclyde, the Tory leader in the Lords. Quote, there are already some very substantive powers In the Lords, no powers, substantive powers. I believe that this historic move to dispossess the possessors of great lands, as somebody put it, but it says here they keep their lands. Oh, please, would you be quiet? I suppose that this purge is simply the most grandiose, the most daring item in Mr. Blair's long-announced program to remove the thatched cottages, the parading gaudies, the pomp and circumstance, all the tourists' beloved symbols of Britain, from the legacy of Britain. We talked about this when Mr. Blair first announced he was going to dethatch Britain's picture in the eyes of the world and substitute for it a picture of the present-day true Britain. Forget those stuffy old magnificent cathedrals and let's have buildings like the French or the new tennis stadium in New York. Lots of visible indoor plumbing, only partially covered with broken, as if bombed, red brick. How about a power station twice the height of the Blackpool Tower? Not historic, mellow, graceful or quaint England, but new, vibrant, inventive, modern, post-modern, contemporary England. Well, I've said it before and I will say it again. People, tourists, are no different from everybody else in living by stereotypes. And every minute, television re-impresses them on us. Tourists feel at home when they get to Paris and see the Eiffel Tower and sit in a cafe where an old man is playing a piano accordion. When they have scones and thick cream sitting in a garden alongside a thatched cottage and see a boy slip an envelope into a scarlet, round-bellied mailbox, they know they're in England, and they love it. As for Mr. Blair's act of daring in firing most of the hereditaries, he would have done more to please Republican prejudices if he'd gone the whole hog and followed the lead of the politician who, in the year of my birth, campaigned up and down the land to get rid of the whole lot, to abolish the House of Lords. This second chamber, as it is, irresponsible, hereditary, absentee. This reformer, who dared 91 years ago to be a good deal more radical than Mr. Blair, was the Right Honourable Winston S. Churchill. He didn't make it.
Well, that was Alistair Cook and his letter from America.
And coming up in the next 30 minutes or so, we'll be joined by public relations experts Peter Mann and John Spira. We'll be talking about the big bank merger and also Will Bernard on a new crackdown on child prostitution.
We also take a look at the front pages of all the newspapers, but let's kick off with Sixpence None the Richer, and there she goes.
There she goes again, racing through my brain, and I just can't contain this feeling that remains. There she goes again, pulsing through
It's a group from Texas in the United States of America. Sixpence None the Richer here on SAFM. There she goes.
If you've missed the most recent bulletin, catch up by phoning Newsbreak on 082 152. Newsbreak will give you the latest developments on the news front in less than 2 minutes. Newsbreak, your own personal connection to SABC News. Just a phone call away. 082 152. Normal cell phone rates apply.
As the countdown begins to the 21st century, there is still one number you can always count on. 007.
And thirdly, really being the voice of the bank. But all the others were quietly and systematically handed over to me.
So could I suggest then that today is really just a date rather than a significant moment where suddenly you find your intro a hell of a lot fuller than it normally is?
The only thing that changed today is that legally I can sign documents in the bank, I can chair meetings of the governance committee, and I can be the public voice of the Reserve Bank. That's the only thing that's changed. Everything else has been business as usual, except that from 7 o'clock this morning I've been doing media work.
Yeah, well, yes, that is the day that's important. It's also nice to see on your first day in office a front page photograph on Business Report of you with smiles on your face, with the IMF man Stanley Fisher announcing that the IMF's reconsidering the sale of 10 million ounces of gold reserves. Tell us about the background to that.
No, the fact is that Stan Fisher was one of the international guests who have been visiting us during the course of this inauguration function. And he then held a press conference to explain whatever journalists wanted to know about. And one of the questions they asked him was about these gold sales. And then he said what he said, which is good. And it seems the gold price has reacted to that. Oh yeah, now I have to carry this gadget now.
Oh yes, you've got your mini Reuters, have you?
Yes, I have to carry this gadget. So the gold price now is about 256.8. So it's doing very well.
Yeah, gold shares up today as well on the stock market.
Yes, and the markets are doing very well. Yeah.
Are you angry at all at the reaction when your appointment was announced last August? We saw a drop in the markets. There was, to some extent, a vote of no confidence, which seemed an overreaction. I don't know if that embittered you in any way.
No, it wasn't a vote of no confidence, contrary to what some journalists think. This was a reaction by the market, maybe of somebody whom they thought came from outside the central bank, and therefore may threaten the independence of the central bank or some such thing. And fact of the matter is that we made it very clear from early on that the independence of the central bank is guaranteed in the Constitution and in the law creating the Reserve Bank, that actually we wrote the Constitution. Therefore, we had no reason to undermine the Constitution. But it was maybe a period of acclimatization. There was this notion that central bank governors throughout the world always come from within the central bank, which is absolute nonsense. There are many central bank governors who actually come from outside central banks. Greenspan, for example, comes from outside the central bank. The Eben Backstrom from the Bank of Sweden comes from outside the central bank. I could go on, give examples. Yes, at the same time, it is true that there are situations where people here in South Africa have come from within central banks. But, people also sometimes are short in memory. There were periods not so long ago when presidents of the country here used to tell the central bank governor how to behave about interest rates. But people have forgotten that. And we have said very clearly that the president of the republic is not going to be giving the governor directions about monetary policy. The day they do that is the day I leave. So it's very clear.
But it is a partnership you have.
It has to be a partnership indeed, because the Reserve Bank is independent. Indeed, to the extent that the government wants it to be independent, but also it's independent not as a state within a state or something that's external to South Africa. It's part of South Africa. The Reserve Bank has therefore to be interested in the development of South Africa. But the Reserve Bank is independent in the way it uses the instruments of monetary policy to achieve the objectives of monetary policy. And really the single most important objective of the Reserve Bank is to maintain price and financial stability. That's the primary function. its contribution to the well-being and development of South Africa is by achieving price and financial stability. The rest other people are going to do.
Are you satisfied you've inherited a smoothly running ship at the moment then, Tito? You don't need to change course?
Well, the ship is sailing, but I think we may need to put a couple of fireworks to get the ship, to ensure that the ship doesn't sink. It's not sinking. It is not the Titanic.
No.
It's sailing in a good way. But there are a number of internal managerial things that have to be changed. No doubt about it, to make sure that the policy-making process is tightened up, that some restructurings do take place. But the basic thing that affects the bulk of our people, i.e. the interest rate regime, is already there.
Yes.
It's the repo system. And the repo system means that there's a daily tender in terms of which the private banks tender with the Reserve Bank the amount of money they require based on the liquidity requirement for the day. And we only send signals, whether we want the repo rate to stay stable, whether we want it to go up, or do we want it to go down. And we send particular signals to the market. That's all we do. The rest is done by the market. And that kind of a system is quite well developed and is useful for our country. It's transparent, it's clear,
Yes.
the banks participate in it. And I think it's a good system.
Now, with that repo, the signals have been very easy for us to read. They've been coming down in chunks of 7 basis points, 8 basis points. Then we saw the banks cut interest rates. It's now coming down at 1 basis point at a time. It's still going down. We're happy with that. But you've slowed it off. What signal do you want? What do you want us to read from that?
Well, we want to have a bit of a period during which it's stable. It must come down, yes, in the manner that it has been coming down. We're happy with it as a bank. We're sending the signals to the market that, yes, we're happy with the way in which they're doing things, because we think that the current international and domestic factors are good for that kind of decline in the rate. We're a little bit concerned about what's happening in the United States, likely increases there in rate, and that's beginning to affect a bit our bond market as well. You saw the R150 going to about 15.08. So we're a little bit concerned about that. But inflation seems to be coming down. A little bit concerned about the core rate of inflation. Don't want to get too technical.
No, I'm
but
happy with
nevertheless, we want it to remain where it is, and we'll study from time to time the economic conditions. And when they improve, we'll give another signal to the market. But if the economic conditions don't improve, we'll also give the signal to the market that the rate must go up. So, yeah, we have that kind of flexible approach. We study the situation on the basis of how we think the situation is. We give a signal to the market for the rate to go up, to come down, to remain stable, or marginal decrease, or marginal increase.
So often we see the coach take over the new team, and he doesn't tamper with the back line or the forwards or anything like that, and suddenly he drops the captain. When are you going to? When are the surprises? When are you going to? You've mentioned very briefly that there are things to be tightened up, things that need to be restructured. When can we expect details of that?
Well, in the course of the next week, I'll make the announcements about the functions that the deputy governors are going to have, for example. I'll also give some more details about the new department that we've created called the Research Department, which will be headed by a chief economist and head of research. We'll make some announcements. But generally, as I said, the ship is sailing. The sailors are doing very well.
Yeah.
And I think that,
but you've got to correct the course.
As they say, if the glove fits, why change it?
Yeah. Well, I see that most of the analysts or the political journalists are saying don't expect any surprises from Tito Mboweni in the first couple of weeks. Obviously, you're gathering your resources around you. You've had a Lekgotla over the weekend, is that right?
No, we're starting tomorrow.
Oh. Yeah. Tell us about the team that you've got, your inner core.
The core is the deputy governors, Jill Marcus, Tim Tahane, who worked for the World Bank for many years, James Cross, who is a market expert. So that's the immediate team around me, together with the chief economist and head of research, Dr. Annie van der Merwe. He has worked for the Reserve Bank for many years. A very good technical person and a committed South African. So that's the immediate team. And then there are about 14 others that we have to work with. General managers, the head of the South African Mint Company, and the head of the South African Banknote Company. Because as you know, we are the only legal authority in the country which is permitted to print money and to mint the coins.
Yeah. You don't fit the mold of of a Reserve Bank governor. You know, you look at these guys, they're stuffy, and here you are, you're a jeweler. When are you going to get married?
No, that's a private matter. That is quite complicated, and we'll leave it like that.
Okay, no, that's fine. It was a question I had to ask, because I went and canvassed everybody, and I don't want to get in trouble.
It's a very complicated private matter.
No, that's fine. We'll leave it at that then. But do you feel any pressures on you to become a lot more conservative in the way you conduct yourself, now that you are the Reserve Bank governor?
You see, the central banks generally and internationally tend to be very conservative. And the central bank governors tend to be conservative. But the world has changed a bit. I don't have to dress in a particularly lousy fashion to be a good central banker. I like good life. I like to dress and dress well. And I design most of my suits anyway.
That I didn't know.
Yes, I design them, and then my tailor, does the tailoring.
So this cut that you're wearing here is absolutely unique.
Yes, I designed it myself.
Is this like a hobby of yours, then, Tito? This is an insight I had no idea about.
Yes, and
Marianne Fassler, look out!
Yes, absolutely. So I, and I look around for the kind of cloth that I want, and I do what I want. So I don't have to be dull and boring. I don't always wear a white shirt, as you can see.
No. So the mustardy yellow, folks.
So yes, so I like to have a good time.
Well, Tito, it's wonderful having you in the studio. If I will live within my means, if you never change, if we can always have access and chat to you as candidly as we have here, I'd really appreciate it.
I think it'll be wonderful for everybody to try to live within their means, because that helps us all to have a stable monetary environment, stable financial and price environment, which is good for monetary policy, and it makes the job of the governor of the Reserve Bank easy. But really, thank you very much for having me here, and I hope to see you from time to time.
Excellent. I'll get some sartorial advice as well as fiscal advice from you in the future.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. That's our Reserve Bank governor. We're going to be talking to Later on, we'll be talking to somebody who's talking.
Talking Heads. You're listening to some of 702's interview highlights from the past 7 days.
This Monday, join me, Nechama Brody, on the Midday Show. I'll be sitting in for Alan Matthews, and we'll be doing the Battle of the Sexes as usual. I won't be standing in for Alan. We'll have somebody else tackling Jenny Chris Williams. We'll also be talking about flying with Alex Economides. And do you know what the Hooter campaign is making such a noise about?
Hi, I'm looking for a bicycle for a 5-year-old.
Absolutely, sir. Hang on. There.
Ah, but that's a man's bike. She's a little girl.
Oh, yes, sir. Woman of the 90s. Aren't they wonderful?
Look here. She wouldn't even reach the pedals.
Perfect for a growing kid. It stretches the legs.
You're insane.
Oh, yes, sir. You'd be crazy to miss a bargain like this. Now would you like to take a test?
Get exactly what you want from the internet with Intercom's choice of services. From basic email to your own website and unlimited internet access for your whole family. If you want the world without paying the earth, call 0800 111 720. That's 0800 111 720. Intercom, a world of choice.
If you would like a dose of divine inspiration, join David Block and 702 at the Linda Auditorium this Friday at 7:15 p.m. for The Power of Vision, Rings and Rivers, and experience some dynamite. Find out how Saturn, with its glorious wings, has inspired people throughout the centuries, and learn how to be positive by observing the unique parallels between the inner worlds of our attitudes and fears with the outer worlds of rings, rivers, and the cosmic tapestry. Book now at CompuTickets and let Rings and Rivers revolutionize your thinking.
We're going to be talking to
Later on, we'll be talking to somebody who's talking. Talking Heads. It's the talk of the week.
Talking Heads on 702 Talk Radio. Never mind the millennium, what about the next 24 hours? That's the title of Clem Sunter's new book. He joined us on Tuesday afternoon on 702, and I asked him how it all came about.
Well, it actually came about as a speech which I was doing more to entertain people to a place that looks after abused children, actually. It's a little cottage. And they kept saying, we're just a little NGO. But I said, you're making a big difference. And actually, it reminds me of a philosopher called Isaiah Berlin, who used to talk about foxes and hedgehogs. And I said, the world is actually about foxes. And so I then gave the kids, plus the teachers, a little lecture on hedgehogs and foxes. And it went down so well that I thought, gosh, this may be a manner in which I can really change people's minds about entrepreneurs, work and employment. And it really has taken off. It's quite incredible how putting a story in a particular manner makes a difference.
And when would that have been? When
That was last year, in fact. I'd already written an article on Isaiah Berlin because he died last year at the ripe old age of 87. And he had an obituary in The Economist, which reminded me of this famous lecture. And I wrote a column for the Sunday Tribune. One of the stories I told was how he went to Downing Street, I think it was at the invitation of Winston Churchill, and sat down to dinner, and Churchill said to him, "Tell me, Mr. Berlin, how do you compose such beautiful songs?" So he said, "I think you're getting me confused with Irving." So I wrote this little article about him, and then I sort of just tossed out this hedgehog fox thing at this particular function, and it went down so well. I've been using it ever since, and yeah, it's on a roll.
It is on a bit of a roll, and I tell you the reason that Clem is here today, because 4 or 6 weeks ago on a Sunday, Clem chatted to all of us here at 702 at sort of mini convention that we were having, and it struck a chord, struck a nerve or something with me, and the little small business network that we do on a Thursday afternoon has evolved out of that. And I guess in many ways that's what it's all about, Clem.
Yeah. Look, my main thesis, which nobody, I may add, has denied, is that big business and government are not going to create jobs over the next 10 years. Obviously, they'll have new projects, and that will create a certain number of jobs, but it's not going to offset the seminal decline in employment as businesses become more efficient, particularly big businesses become more efficient, and of course in this country, overshadowed by the low gold price, which is causing a lot of losses on the gold mines. Plus, government itself has pledged over the next 5 years to reduce the civil service from 1.5 to 1.2 million. Now, I'm not sure that they're going to live up to that pledge, given political realities of the huge level of unemployment already. But it does suggest they're not going to create.
It's not going to get any bigger.
It's not going to get any bigger. The civil service is not going to be any bigger. They're not going to create huge numbers of jobs, which leaves medium-sized, small and micro enterprise. And what's really got me in this country is how, for most people, it's a fringe sector. It's like you have Grahamstown Art Festival, and you have sort of things which go on right on the fringe. Well, that is basically the SMME sector in this country. It's not considered serious business by the kind of big institutions, which are government, banks, big business, and so forth and so on. And I look at the one economy in the world which has created over 1 million jobs in the last 5 years, which is the Californian economy, and that is purely as a result of taking small business very seriously. And even Hollywood now is a cluster of super specialized small businesses.
But the whole Californian thing is maybe a good example for us, because they were kind of forced into that
Yeah,
situation.
they were.
For different reasons, we're being forced into it as well.
Well, in their case, it was the decline of defense. When the Cold War ended, the Pentagon cut back. And this led to a loss of 500,000 jobs in California between 1990 and 92. So that was their Vesuvius, as I call it. It was their shock event. And it led them to institute a whole range of small business measures in 1992. One of which was getting money to the foxes, to the entrepreneurs.
How did they do that, Clem? Was there one man with a vision driving it through?
The governor at the time, and I can't remember his name, actually really punted small business. And was it Wilson?
Pete Wilson.
Yeah, I think it was Pete Wilson. And he really punted small business. And he put in place things like tax credits for big business, that if they invested in small business, then not only could they write off the investment, they could write off an extra 30 or 40% against tax. So it was a positive incentive for big business to invest in small business. But most of all, they offered very widespread credit guarantees from the state to small businesses. Now, we have an excellent little institution here called Kula. It's just that it's not well known around the country. It's only got 300 million rand of capital. Personally, I think Kula should be given 1 billion rand, because at the moment they're getting a 95% repayment rate on the loans that they've guaranteed.
What is it, Clem?
Well, it's a state agency that basically grants guarantees to small business entrepreneurs, so that they can go to banks. And secondly, it actually lends money itself to what they call retail finance institutions like Get Ahead, I think it's called the Startup Fund, to all the micro lending agencies. Kula is kind of a wholesale financier of them. And it's, as I said, it's run by this guy, Sizwe Tati, and his team, and they've done a splendid job, but it's just not known. And it's a shame, because it is precisely what dug California out of the pit, was easy access to credit for entrepreneurs. But there was also two other things which were critical. Firstly, they have 2,500 venture capital funds in California, which specialize in small business investment. In fact, I think they have a website there where you click in shoes, click in $1 million, and there's the names and addresses of the chief executive officers of the funds that you can approach. And here in South Africa, we've never heard of venture capital. I mean, I had a girl in Cape Town on the phone to me the other day saying, I heard you on the radio in Cape Town, and I just want you to know my story. I'm trying to start a newspaper on UCT campus. I've sold all the advertising for the printing costs. I've asked the bank for a bridging loan of 5,000 Rand. Not a single bank in Cape Town will lend me the money. So I said, please let me ring around for you. So I rang around the major banking chains in Cape Town, and I said, please put me through to the venture capital department. Half didn't know what venture capital meant, and half put me through to property after the panpipes. And I thought, this is terrible that in Cape Town, nobody's heard of venture capital. And indeed, if you called into the studio, Alan, any of the sort of big banks here in Johannesburg and challenged them about what are you doing to invest in small and micro enterprise, they'd find it very difficult to answer. And honestly, it is the difference between California and the rest of America, the fact that most of the venture capital in America is flowing into California. In fact, I got a leaflet today saying that they're just overwhelmed with venture capital because of the interest in internet companies. And of course, it is the difference between America and Europe, the fact that America has this tradition of betting on small business, which Europe is only beginning to acknowledge. And then the third thing is NASDAQ, which is a very specialist stock exchange in the United States for small business, where they have computerized trading without stock, they have simple flotation rules, and what's more, they have internet stockbrokers, which you can ring up on the internet, you can buy small lots of shares, you can pay on the internet, so the whole thing is geared towards backing small entrepreneurs. And it's brilliant. The trading on NASDAQ is now similar to the New York Stock Exchange. Unfortunately, the JSE here has very strict rules, which, you know, they don't want to have scams, but it costs a lot of money to float a company on the JSE. You've got to have the lawyer's fees, you've got to publishers' prospectus, you've got to do all these things. And I know that the JSE has done, I think, a wonderful thing with this EASE program, opening up an internet site. But what I'd really like to see is a fully fledged stock exchange for small and micro enterprise.
Well, if you haven't figured it out already, this afternoon we're talking about Clem Sunter, and we're talking to Clem Sunter, and we're really talking about the future of the South African economy, in the future success of South Africa.
Look, Alan, I said 10 years ago that the key was negotiation between the ANC and the National Party to a successful political settlement rather than a civil war. And lots of people at the time said this is implausible because no party has ever negotiated itself out of power. Well, the National Party did just that. Now I'm saying it's time we established a real environment for entrepreneurs. And lots of people are saying to me the ANC will never do that. I reckon that the ANC are going to do just that over the next 5 years.
Are you picking up hints that there's that kind of thinking within government?
Absolutely. I mean, I've been working on a project in government just for a few weeks, which is helping them on Y2K compliance for local authorities. For my sins, I think, rather than my virtues, I've been made chairman of this company, M2K, which is assisting the local authorities. And I've actually met quite a few directors general and cabinet ministers. And what really strikes me is the incredible pragmatism that is now being shown, which is, forget about ideology, we want things that work. And if the only way you're going to create 1 million jobs is to create 1 million small enterprises, then I think the government actually is going to put its shoulder behind such a program.
Clement, from what we're saying today and what I've thought about and heard you say before, it's going to take a monumental mind shift on the part of all of us. I mean, you talk about credit.
Yeah.
I mean, I kind of grew up in a country thinking that credit is not a good thing. So there's obviously good credit and bad credit now. It breaks the mold of what a kind of decent upbringing was.
Well, that's absolutely right.
Yeah.
I mean, I was brought up as a hedgehog. I mean, let me just, for listeners, define a hedgehog. A hedgehog is a person who believes in grand visions, perfect formulae, basically having a respectable education.